Hi, everybody. This is Renee Reisman. I'm the Educational Programs Coordinator for Los Angeles office of California Lawyers for the Arts. Before giving it away to Stu and Sean, who I'm so excited to have joined us today from Ramo Law, I'm actually going to play a short video from the Executive Director, Ramo Robinson, and she's going to explain what our CLA services are in addition to the great educational programs you're at right now.
Hello, my name is Alma Robinson, and I am the Executive Director of California Lawyers for the Arts. CLA is a statewide nonprofit organization that was founded in 1974 to serve artists and arts organizations of all disciplines with advocacy as well as services that provide support with legal and business issues. With staffed offices in San Francisco, Berkeley, Sacramento, Los Angeles, and San Diego, we provide several core services. First, we provide legal counseling to specialized attorneys who provide assistance with a variety of intellectual property questions, as well as contract reviews and negotiations, and other important business issues. Depending on the client's financial status, legal assistance may be available on a pro bono or reduced fee basis. We also provide a specialized program that assists independent inventors and small startups with their patent applications. To help with situations involving disputes, we provide a range of alternative services, including negotiations counseling, mediation, and arbitration that can avoid the expense and hassle of going to court. Finally, we offer a full menu of educational programs that include workshops, symposia, and conferences on various legal topics for artists and arts organizations. Many of these programs are posted on our YouTube channel, and we encourage you to use these tools to educate yourself on the legal issues before you reach out for specialized assistance from our organization. Thank you for joining today's program, and please consider joining CLA on our website at www.calawyersforthearts.org so that we can continue to maintain our full range of services. Thank you.
Now it's finally time to give the floor to Sean Pope and Stu Arbury. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm so excited to learn more about TV deals. And I'm just kind of gonna hide away right now and let you guys just take the floor.
Hey guys, so we both work at Ramo Law, and I apologize for the halo effect here. There's just, if I turn the light out, you won't see me, so this is what it is, unless I position my head accordingly. So Sean and I work at Ramo Law. To be very clear, I'm not an attorney. The firm has a packaging and sales department, and I started consulting with them about 4 years ago. My background is I was a creative executive at Dimension Films, which was the horror/family movie division of the Weinstein Company. I was also director of development at a company called Captivate Entertainment that did the Bourne Identity franchise. So I'm here to kind of provide sort of an overview as I see fit in terms of what the market looks like right now. It's easy to hear statistics like hundreds of shows are getting greenlit and Netflix is on a buying spree for family content. And it's another thing to really kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what actually is going to make a show or a package more attractive. And I'll throw it over to Sean, who's one of our senior associates over at Ramo, and let him give a little introduction of himself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Pope. I'm a senior associate here at Ramo Law. I deal across the spectrum of entertainment from early development of projects all the way through distribution and kind of delivery to distributors, sales agents, and networks of content. I do a lot of unscripted television, some scripted television, and feature films as well, right? Typically around the $500,000 to $30 million budget range. But kind of I see the broad spectrum of everything from the origination of the concept all the way through that content being delivered. So can add that broad knowledge base as we go through everything.
And with that, I'll kind of start with this presentation. Okay, so everyone should see this big purple block that says the state of TV. So one of the things that I would say is I kind of opened this with, I don't know if everyone remembers the South Park episode with the underpants gnomes, but there's this classic moment where they're showing the 3 phases of their business plan of stealing the underpants, which is phase 1 is collect underpants. Phase 2, they're silent. And then phase 3 is profit. And when they're pushed on not knowing what phase 2 is, they just repeat phase 3 as profit. And I do think where it's happily, I've seen this episode as a model. A lot of things that, like, whether it's visual creative or small business or anything, often forget phase 2 because, frankly, I'll talk to a lot of new clients that'll say, like, okay, I've got an idea for a show. And then they literally think that, okay, they got the idea and now it's profit time, right? And so this is kind of going to be a little bit of a spectrum in terms of how to identify phase 2. So when you're if you're trying to put together a series, it's both simpler and more complicated than trying to put together a movie. If you're putting together a movie, like an independent movie, whether it's a $50,000 movie, a $500,000 movie, a $5 million movie, you can do a patchwork quilt of kind of financing, right? And there's different metrics of success. There's distributors that are huge studios, and there are distributors that are like smaller distributors, but there's a funnel for that. With putting together a TV series, you could say you're going to fund it yourself. You still need one of these big head honchos, Amazon, Netflix, Apple, to put it on their site. Otherwise, your next choice is basically like YouTube or something. And so accordingly, you're servicing a master. You're putting together this show. You have a limited number of customers. Yeah, you can talk about what the audience wants, but ultimately your customer is the buyers. You know them, they're household names. Very rare that there's a buyer that you don't already know about. So there's 4 basic types of buyers. You've got your broadcast networks, your basic cable networks, your premium cable networks, and your streamers. If we were having this conversation 30, 40 years ago, we would only be talking about broadcast. Over the past 40 years, first basic cable emerged, then premium cable, then streamers. And streamers are now taking up a progressively bigger part of the pie, especially as broadcast, basic cable, and premium cable platforms launch their own streamers. So then to get into is, what are the success for each of these different type of buyers? For broadcast, it for the most part is ratings and audience demographics. It's ratings because they are still essentially the quote unquote free shows, meaning they make their money through ad dollars. Now, as everything's switched over to DVR and whatnot, they clock real-time ratings or live plus 3-day ratings. Their advertisers are gonna pay them less if it's a show that you just record 10 episodes of and watch 3-4 months later. So that delivers the need for them to have some sort of urgency. Like, they want event shows that you have to watch right now. Then audience demographics matters because what type of audience is watching a show is going to factor into what type of advertisers want to advertise on that show. Way back in the day, I was one of my first production jobs. I worked on Boston Legal, which had moderate ratings on ABC, but it had a very rich audience, and therefore it was getting like Mercedes and Omega watches, like advertising on it. Then we get to basic cable. For basic cable, it's some of the same metrics because there's still ads. They want those ratings. They want those real-time, live plus 3 days ratings. They want audience demographics because they do sell for advertising, but because they're also getting cut into a degree of the overall basic cable packages, the ratings on a basic cable show don't have to deliver the same. There's not the same pressure of huge numbers as on broadcast shows, which is why it's a huge deal when a show like Walking Dead, a basic cable show, does better ratings than broadcast shows. And then there's a little bit of broadcast sister network support that can go into that as well. Then we get into premium cable, and now's where everything gets thrown out the window because for the most part, there's no advertisers. So ratings are essentially for premium cable shows. Ratings can sometimes be like a headline or something. But what they really care about is both maintaining the subscribers they have and attracting new subscribers. So HBO is going to want to run the table with doing lots of Game of Thrones spinoffs because they want to maintain the Game of Thrones subscribers they already have. And maybe they're worried that post Game of Thrones, they've lost a lot of those Game of Thrones subscribers and they want to bring them back. And then the other thing they care about is Emmys and prestige, kind of more so than the ratings themselves, because if HBO, you don't necessarily need to be watching their Emmy-winning show. If you know that HBO is a network that wins Emmys, you're more likely to subscribe to that channel, whether or not you end up watching that show in general. Versus it's the flip side. I remember when 30 Rock was on NBC and it was winning all these ratings, even accepting the award for Best Comedy Series, Tina Fey was saying, hey guys, we're on like Thursdays at 8 o'clock. Because those Emmys were not going to matter if they didn't translate into rating success. The flip side is true often for premium cable networks. And then finally, you have the streamers, these huge behemoths, and this is where it gets very complicated. So like premium cable channels, they care about subscribers. They both care about retaining current subscribers and activating new ones. they really care about retention through a season. If Netflix knows the second you stop watching. So if Netflix spends a huge ton of money on some big new show and 5 million people watch episode 1, but only 500,000 people make it all the way through episode 10, that's going to factor into their decision to pick it up for episode 11. Because this isn't like a show where, oh, maybe people didn't watch that night, but we'll hype up the season 2 return. No, you have it at your fingertips. They know if they know you have the infinite choice to watch it. So if you stop at any point, or if there's a huge audience drop off, that's going to factor into their decision whether or not to pick up the show for a new season. They also very much care about Emmys and prestige, kind of for that same reason I said for HBO, which is that, I heard an exec at Amazon once describe it as like, look, we're a store and we want you to think of us as, this is before they acquired Whole Foods, we want you to think of us as Whole Foods instead of Ralph's or something like that. Nothing against Ralph's. So when Transparent is out there winning all these Emmys, it didn't necessarily matter if lots of people were watching it. Amazon became known as a high quality place. And the other crazy thing with streamers is that all of them have these different kind of metrics for success within themselves. Netflix is about subscribers and activation and retention. But then you have Apple, which, yeah, they want subscribers. Yeah, they want that activation and retention. But essentially, the platform can just be a massive advertisement for Apple products. So if you're watching For All Mankind or Ted Lasso or Servant, maybe the next time you're due for a new cell phone, you're like, you know what? I'm not going to get the Samsung. I'm going to get the Apple. And then it's doing its job. Amazon, in a similar sense, they just want to keep you a Prime customer so that you keep ordering stuff from them and you keep your Prime membership. Disney has this interesting thing because they built Disney on the back of both their massive Disney library and their kind of 5 chief universes. You've got Star Wars, Marvel, Disney Animation, Pixar, and then you also have Simpsons and National Geographic. They are essentially continuing to churn out these movies because it's like Shang-Chi comes out and you want to catch up on Marvel movies on Disney Plus before going to see Shang-Chi in the theater. Or maybe you see Shang-Chi in the theater and then that leads you to sign up for Disney Plus to watch the other Marvel shows. And then the last thing on this slide that I'll say is foreign territory appeal. These networks, these platforms are expanding and expanding and expanding into all around the world. And so if they're to think of, okay, we just got a foothold in Brazil, or we just got a foothold in India, like what is to Indian teenagers or like the Brazilian upper class? And it doesn't just mean, shows in Hindu or in Portuguese. It'll mean like, okay, werewolves, yes or no, thrillers, yes or no. And they will do that kind of research to try to figure out what plays well in those territories. So ultimately the challenge is, how do you develop competitive series when the metrics of success have never had more variance from buyer to buyer? You have the brilliant idea, or you got the rights to this or that book. How do you then start to position it in a way that these buyers, because ultimately these are your customers, way before the audience, these are your customers. How do you put it together in a way that is going to give you the leverage where you can? So that's when we get into packaging. And it's important to think about things, and when you're packaging TV, what helps, what hurts, and what's neutral. So here's some example of some things that help. A high value showrunner. We're talking Vince Gilligan, we're talking Veena Sud, we're talking Aaron Sorkin, someone where it's like from, Vince Gilligan, it's like from the creator of Breaking Bad. That's both going to help with the buyer because the buyer wants to get that sexy showrunner show in. They want to be able to have that splashy deadline announcement. And there's a belief that this will then drive an audience. Like, oh, the Breaking Bad fans are going to tune in. A high value actor. And I'm talking like a household name or a recognizable person. We'll get to some of the hurts in a second, but like there's a new Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson are doing True Detective. Like if those, when I was working at Captivate, we'd have discussions about like actors to go to for these Universal movies. And we would say, is this person a hire or is this person an attachment? A hire was like Universal already greenlit the movie. They already want to make it. So then go get the best actor possible. An attachment is Universal is on the fence about the movie. But if we bring them Margot Robbie, that will push them towards a yes. Or if we bring them Chris Pratt, that will push them towards a yes. A high value director. Of showrunner, actor, and director, I'd say in Episodic's director is sort of the least valuable of the three, but it still can help, especially if you've got a genre horror series and you get Sam Raimi attached to direct your pilot, that's going to mean something. Then coming in through a deal. So all of these platforms are just signing up showrunners, actors, directors, producers, companies that are attached to IP to either first look or overall deals, which we'll get to in a later slide. This just helps because if you are random project, it helps if you're random project. Oh, but attached to produce is this company that we have an overall deal with, or this company that we have a first look deal with. All of a sudden, you literally are like in that next pile of consideration. Strong IP, a hit foreign film or a hit foreign format that you're remaking, a best-selling novel. If it's a true story, is it a famous true story? Do you have life rights? Do you have like a key biography of a subject that you can build it upon? Is it a spin-off of some sort of thing? Is there a graphic novel? People want IP. And then ultimately, whether or not it fits a buyer mandate. We'll get to those a little bit later, and those are a little bit fluid, like they kind of change every year. But these are things to really be thinking about beyond simply you are a person with great idea. Those are some things that can help when you're thinking about TV packaging. Hertz. Okay, a low value actor. I'm talking to someone and they say, yeah, I've got an actor attached to my project. And I say, who? And they say, Tom Stevens. And I say, who's that? And they're like, oh, he was on Walking Dead for 3 episodes last season. I'm like, this is not going to help. When you have to think about what you're going to add to a project, you think about that thing I said about a hire or an attachment. If Netflix is on the fence about whether or not to make your show, will the addition of this actor or this director or this showrunner move them towards a yes? Because if they won't, then you need to think real hard about, are you torpedoing something here? If Netflix is on the fence about your show and you add random actor in your lead role, 1, Netflix may not like that actor. 2, Netflix may see the project as smaller because for all you knew, they were really liking it and thinking Chris Pratt for that lead role. 3, Netflix knows that if they do get involved, all of a sudden the agencies are going to open up they're going to lay out the red carpet and say, here's all the available high value actors. And you've taken out that piece for them where they can't put a Chris Pratt type in that role. So be careful about like going after someone who might be a fantastic creative choice, but is just not going to like turn heads. Same goes for low value director. Same goes for low value showrunner. Non-value add producers. Look, nothing against producers. We're producers ourselves. There's projects that we're producing in tandem with the firm, but producers are the first people to get culled once a project is going to move into development because the network cares about their actor, their director, their showrunner. If there's a producer that they love, or if you're the producer that is doing this and you are involved, that's great. But a lot of projects start to gather producer in the initial phases. And none of these producers are necessarily like really moving the ball forward. And then when Netflix is like, all right, we want to make the show. Who's our EP here? Now you have 5 different people, and that's going to freak the network out. And ultimately, an undefined audience. Look, this is a little bit murky. This is a little bit subjective. Who would have known that something like Squid Game, a Korean battle royale-esque, hyper-violent narrative series structured like a game show would be this huge, massive hit? But still in your pitching of it, whether you're talking about your package or you're talking about what the story of the show is itself, you need to have a perspective and need to have an ability to verbalize why this is going to appeal to certain audiences or large audiences. And then we get to neutral. So here are some neutral things. Financing. This is a tricky thing with TV. Again, this is not an independent movie. This is not you have a $3 million budget, you've got $1 million committed, and you're looking for the other 2. This is you're going premium or bust here. There isn't really that much of an ecosystem yet for independent series. Of course, there are examples, things like Deli Crime, which Ivanhoe financed and is on Netflix, but those are very much the exceptions. So if you bring in financing, sometimes it can help, sometimes it can hurt. At Weinstein, there was the Marco Polo series. It was in motion before I got there, but that was a huge $100 million series, and it had financing from a of sources. So that makes sense there. But there are platforms where if you say, hey, I've got this investor and he's willing to finance the entire first season, that could theoretically help you. If you do have it, you can keep it as a card to play should a buyer not want to front all the money for your first season or so. But be careful about locking any of it in, because there are times when a buyer would be like, oh yeah, well, we like the show, but we want to assume all of the financing because we want to be able to tap into as much of the upside as possible. So be careful about that. And then that also goes into whether or not to like finance a first season of a show. My advice is often, if you have the financing to finance 10 half-hour episodes of your comedy series, why not just finance a 2-hour movie and use that as a backdoor pilot? There's going to be more of an ecosystem for your pilot or for your 2-hour movie to get out in the world than you end up financing 10 episodes of a show with no buyer ready. And then what happens when they say no? Or what happens when they're like, we would have said yes, but we don't like this cast member, so therefore it's a no. And then the other thing is production position attachments. And again, this is where that independent filmmaker mind comes in. If you're putting together an independent film, you'd be like, all right, we've got our casting director. They're going to help us, secure our people. We've got our production designer. These things for a network like a Netflix and Apple, again, think they're on the fence. They don't know whether or not they want to move on your show. Is you saying, well, guess what? We've got this casting director involved, really going to matter to them? Guess what? We've got this production designer involved. I mean, maybe barely only for a genre show and you've got like a top-notch designer. But again, Netflix knows that if they say yes, all of those types of positions are going to fall into place. So that leads us to what material to put together if one is creating a series. And again, I don't know to brand new writers. I don't know if I'm talking to established producers, both in TV or in features, but this is still sort of what it essentially boils down to. So first off, you've got a script. Now, a lot of people on this have probably heard, they've listened to podcasts from established screenwriters or talked to established screenwriters that they know who have said, oh, don't ever write for free, don't ever write on spec, sell your idea and get the network to pay you to write the script. That's great if you are already a writer of note who the network wants to work with or has worked with the network in the past. If you're not a writer of note, you basically just have an idea and then they're going to be like, but they haven't seen it proven on paper. They're at least going to want to see samples of yours and still they're going to think like, well, has this person been in a writer's room? Like, how do we know they can deliver on the page? So for the most part, if you're a newer to the game creative, yes, you need a pilot script. Those upper level people that you're hearing talk on podcasts or that upper level showrunner friend of yours that goes in and sells a pitch, that person got there and that person's name is speaking for themselves. Then we get to a pitch. Okay, so you do want a pitch ready. You don't just want a pilot script, but you want a proper pitch document, a pitch Bible. Now, there's a difference. There's not one set format of Bibles, but I think there's kind of two big categories. If you go and you Google like the show Bible for Star Trek, The Next Generation or something, you'll be probably going to find some 100-page document. That's not what you need. That's a Bible that's put together once the show's already going. So this is like a real proper blueprint for how they're going to proceed forward in the show. You need the more streamlined, you need basically like the sales brochure for the show. So like a 10 to 15 document that does your characters, that does the overall intent of the show, usually a pilot episode summary, a pretty significant summary of the first season. I don't like breaking it into episodes because every different buyer has different episode needs. Some want an 8-episode season, some want a 13 episodes, some want 10 episodes. So if you present them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that can feel limiting. I highly prefer pilot episode summary and then like season 1 summary. Look, if you saw it as 8 episodes and Netflix wants it but wants it as 13, you'll figure out how to turn it into 13 creatively. And then like a season 2 and beyond. Yes, limited series are popular, but limited series are kind of like the new Oscar movies, Mare of Easttown, things like that. Think about the huge names and huge, usually feature types of writers that do a limited series. So if you're a newer comer, even if your show feels very much like a one and done season, have a perspective on what season 2 and beyond can be. As soon as I say limited, people say, yeah, we're not really doing limiteds anymore unless you bring it from Scott Cooper or something. Then we get to a deck. A deck can be helpful. It's sort of genre dependent. If you're doing a horror show, a sci-fi show, anything along those lines, then like do an atmospheric deck. Can do a lookbook. You can incorporate the text that you've already done into the pitch document, and that can be very helpful. If you're doing a comedy, up to you. I do know that decks can be time intensive. We can generate decks for clients at the firm or work with clients to make decks, but I don't think you absolutely need a deck. I do think you absolutely need a script and a pitch document. Then we get to a sizzle reel. Now we're kind of upgrading in terms of time and resources you're going to spend on something. And sizzle reel, for those that doesn't know, is basically a 3 to 5 minute trailer for your show, usually assembled as a collage of other movies and shows. These can be great when they're done right. And again, like for a comedy, not really gonna help you out. But for like a cool action thriller concept or a sci-fi, very much can help. And finally, we do the proof of concept. This is you're gonna go out and shoot something. And again, there's no set rules for what this needs to be. If you're doing a comedy and it's like sort of an It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia thing, well, get together and shoot a high quality 10 to 15 minute piece. If you're doing a thriller or a horror show or a sci-fi show, is there like a 5-minute chunk that you can do that like proves the concepts, which is exactly what the name of that material is. I do not advise you to try to cram a pilot episode into 5 minutes. That's not the point. It's more like, think of like your pilot episode is like a pie, and you're going to take a small slice out that's like, maybe you're trying to prove like this is the new like flying werewolves show, and you've got a really great visual effects idea for how it's going to look. So do like a terrifying 5-minute sequence of flying werewolves. I just made that up on the spot. Someone can run with that idea if they want. I won't be upset. So then we move on. And so I said earlier about how network mandates. Now, these are always, always, always subject to change. There's a few things that are very, very big right now. One is diversity, which is a great thing. Every network they've been doing diversity initiatives behind the scenes for a long time now, but now it's just very much like they want, underrepresented voices, underrepresented people both in front of and behind the camera, to look for that. Unfortunately, if you're not unfortunately, but if you're someone who looks like me and I'm behind the camera and I'm in front of the camera, I could strategically think about how do I build this show so that it's going to have more representation, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's going to make your show more attractive in the eyes of a buyer. Genres that travel well: sci-fi, thriller, action. Of course, they're still making comedies. We're going to be making comedies forever, but comedies are very often built around more and more so like a unique personality, like a comedian or something like Dave on Hulu, and contemporary. People do not want period. And then, of course, there's Bridgerton. And then, of course, there's Queen's Gambit. But those are the exceptions that prove the rule. The number one thing people tell me they don't want is period. Now, you can look at Bridgerton or Queen's Gambit, both coming from IP, both coming from huge showrunners, both fully loaded with cast. But if you're a newcomer and your concept is a period show, try to see if you can steer it contemporary. Or if it must be period, realize it's going to put a lot of stress on needing to put those other pillars in place. And then this is just an example of like some of these mandates that sometimes get circulated. You can see how like Disney Plus, they say diversity is key in all sense of the word. Comedy is their focus. I mean, in particular, probably because they're like, we're good on sci-fi. We're good on The Mandalorian, but what can we do in comedy? ABC, they want female forward content, female empowerment. I like this word disruptive, which I'll get to later. But like a huge thing is in a sea of all these shows, what is going to make this show stand out? And it's important to figure out how to verbalize that. All right, so moving on from this, the anti-mandates. Again, these are also subject to change, but the 3 key things that I hear people do not want are period series, limited series that don't have elements. Like, again, Queen's Gambit only gets made with those high-profile writers, directors, and actors attached. And people are pretty sick of industry series. Like, there always are going to be new ones that come out. I mean, Dave's essentially a type of show like Entourage, but for the most part, people say, we don't want any more inside baseball. Okay, so the final little piece of this is, earlier I talked about first look versus overall deals. I said if you wanted your show to come in through a first look or an overall deal. Well, here's basically the key difference. A first look deal is, let's say Sean has a first look deal. I'm Netflix, I have a first look deal with Sean. During the terms of this deal, any show Sean develops, I get first crack at it. Now, if I say no, Sean can take it wherever he wants. But Sean, I'm giving Sean some financial anything from like a huge deal to like, sometimes it's even just enough money for like office space and an executive or two. But Sean is now incentivized to bring things my way. And because I have this deal with him, I'm incentivized to say yes to them. Now, if Sean has an overall deal with me, usually that's a lot more expensive on my end. And if I say no to it, Sean can't take it anywhere. So that means Sean is 100% incentivized to be developing shows that he thinks I'll want. Because if I say no, the show's dead in the water. With a first look deal, if I pass, he can go elsewhere. As of February 2021, there were over 1,000 deals between production companies, writers, directors, and actors on one side and buyers on the other. And of those 1,000, approximately 620 were overall deals and approximately 426 are first look deals. And by the way, this number is always in flux. If you read Deadline, you're going to see usually a deal or two like this every week announced, if not more. Here's an example. Amazon has 50 pod deals. 32 of those are first look and 18 of those are overall. And an example is Monkey Paw, Jordan Peele. He has a first look deal with them. They have 24 writer deals. 4 of those are first, 20 are overall. And here we go. Neil Gaiman is in an overall deal with Amazon. And lastly, they have 5 director deals. 3 of them are first look, 2 of them are overall deals. And this is Reed Morano, who's in an overall deal with. Then we go to something like Apple. They have 22 production company deals, 9 first look, 11 overall, 2 other, like for example, they have a production deal with Harpo. Leonardo DiCaprio's company, Appian Way, has a first look deal with Apple. For writers, they have 5 overall deals and 1 first look deal. This is Carrie Aaron, who has a first look deal with them. So then we move on. These are kind of the weird like middlemen at this point between buyers and production companies. Talking Sony, E1, Warner Brothers, Universal TV. So here are the pros to if you're thinking about approaching a studio. 1, they can bring financing, which as we discussed can help or hurt. But if it's a big, massive show, you're probably going to want to have some sort of studio partner, or the buyer's going to want to have some sort of studio partner. They may have high value talent locked into deals. Studios have first look and overall deals across that run the gamut. So maybe if you want that writer or that director, that actor involved in your show in your producerial way, you'll have to go through their studio. And there are many that feed right into buyers vertically. Warner Brothers going into HBO, all under time. Cons, well, as we just discussed with financing, they can detract from a buyer's position. A studio might be attractive with one buyer, but might not be attractive to another buyer, just depending on what sort of politics are happening or what sort of other deals are in place. Just as an example, thus far, over 66 series have been announced by Netflix in the past 2 years. Netflix itself is the studio or co-studio on 24 of them, so about just over a third. Here's just some, I encourage all of you, you're reading Deadline, you're reading Variety, next time you see a new show announced, do what I like to call a little bit of a anatomy of the package. Emily Deschanel leading the cast of this book series, what the genre is at Netflix. You can see how this came together. This wasn't just Netflix buys into just great idea with no other attachments. Then we have this Day Job from Mary Holland and Clea Duvall. This is a diverse type of show. It's LGBTQ. They were the duo that did Happiest Season, and it's with Temple Hill producing and Lionsgate TV as the studio. I'm not sure where this project is. This is a couple weeks old. And then we have one in huge Swedish movie turned into huge American remake. Damien Bashir, Academy Award winning actor, going to series at Showtime. That's a massive package, right? Okay, so the ultimate takeaways. It's a highly active development period right now in TV, but buyers do hold all the leverage. It's imperative for producers to deliver projects that service buyer needs, which includes high value attachments, attractive genres, strong IP, diversity on and off camera, somewhat fits into their mandates, and attracts and retains audiences. And a key term I was saying about how to stand out, a key term I've heard a lot is clutterbuster. How is your show going to be positioned at that buyer to be the one that pops? How do you make the argument that you have the Squid Game? Because they're going to try to poke holes in it. Their job is to find the next Squid Game. And how do you very succinctly and creatively, both regard to your package and with the idea itself, sort of prove that this is the one that they should do? So with that sort of concludes the presentation. If you're writing a show with a diverse cast, where should you include that? In your pitch document? Look, in the pitch document, you're going to describe your cast in a way that it says Latino or Black or LGBTQ. And are you writing a script, or are you putting together a show that is essentially colorblind or gender blind? Or are you writing characters that are specifically of that representation? So yeah, I wouldn't in the pitch document tally up, guess how many diverse people we have. It's just going to be apparent in and of itself. Regarding materials, can you share about when to share them with a potential buyer? Would love examples of how that can look. Okay, so lots to unpack here. My recommendation would be to not go to a buyer, Netflix or Amazon or Hulu, until you have partnered with a production company. or you've gotten some of these elements in place. And we work with clients all the time to help them do that with the right kind of material. If you just go straight to Netflix, look, I have friends at all of these buyers, often people that I was like assistants with back in the day or execs with at one company. Like, we all keep in touch. But I'll call like my friend at Apple and I'll bring him like what I think is a pretty decent package. And he's like, hey man, I love you, but we're doing M. Night Shyamalan shows. You got to bring me someone of that level, or like, I'm going to consider this. So it's not really about a calendar or like in the year to do it. It's you take it to them when you've got enough, when you've got the materials, unless you have like a script and a pitch document and it like perfectly fits exactly like some specific thing they're looking for, you need to put these other things in place first. You need to build the foundation a little bit. Overall deals means they get to look at it first, and if they reject it, you can't take it anywhere else. They get exclusivity for how long? They get exclusivity for the entire term of the deal. So if I'm Netflix and Sean's in a 2-year overall deal with me, everything he develops in that 2 years, I either say yes or it's dead. And Sean, to my knowledge, let's say it's like the last month of our deal and you present me a show and I pass. When our deal expires, can you take that show elsewhere, or is it was still under the overall deal? Or I guess it depends.
So it depends, right? It's all about how that contract's negotiated. A lot of the times you might see like a non-circumvention clause, which normally means that, hey, if I bring this to Stu and then it doesn't work out, or if Stu's Netflix, I bring Netflix and it doesn't work out under my overall deal, there might be a period of time post-term that I can't go and shop it elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Or you, Netflix, can come back within that 6 or 9 months or 12 months, wherever the term is, after and say, hey, we know we said no at this time, but our mandate has changed. And now we are looking for that period piece from 1970s Vietnam. We want to take that now. So it really depends on what the terms of the overall deal are. It's not something that you're going to be able to necessarily know from a deadline announcement. A non-circumvention clause is what it's called. And you find those also a lot, not necessarily just in first look and overall deals. We were going to get to it in a little bit, but we can touch on it now. And it's one of the elements that Stu kind of touched upon, which was, partnering with a potential production company as one of your elements in order to go out to a buyer, which is kind of a common way, like these production companies are the ones that are having these overall first look deals. You'll be entering into a deal with them for your concept, typically under a shopping agreement, where you might be bound by similar terms of like, hey, I'm going to pair with Monkey Paw for 6 months. They're going to try their best to go sell to an Amazon or Netflix. If it doesn't work out, then what happens after that term? If it's my concept, might not be able to go and shop it to other networks or other production companies for 6 to 9 or 12 months after my shopping deal with them expires. So it can also be found in kind of your deal as you're setting it up with the production company in order to go out to a buyer.
Fantastic. See, this is where all that I'm saying is a bunch of industry stuff, but Sean's schooling comes into play with a lot of that expert legal knowledge, and it's why he's the best. Can you share more about phase 2, how to connect with studios, production companies, networks, and streamers? It's kind of exactly what we were talking about. Frankly, if you're a newer creative to the scene, part of the reason you would end up going with a production company like Monkey Paw, if you get it in there, is like Monkey Paw is probably going to then make that connection for you. Monkey Paw will reach out to the streamer. Monkey Paw will reach out to additional people to come aboard. We do that ourselves based on both our expertise in terms of assessing projects where they are creatively, but then if we're like, okay, this is in good shape. Here's the types of people we can go to and try to attach them. Or maybe we're just like flagging it to the agencies being like, hey, we need a showrunner of this type who's available. You should read it. It's fantastic. That's kind of that's the hurry up and wait game of phase 2. So I don't know if that answers your question, but if you know people at these streamers, and when I say know people at the streamer, I don't mean someone who is like in accounting there, or knowing someone at the streamer means someone in the creative development world at these streamers whose job it is to look and read and find new projects and evaluate accordingly. Another common pitfall that people say is they're like, oh, I know someone at HBO, and they know someone, no disrespect, who's like, oh, he's a lawyer at HBO. And I'm like, that lawyer is great. That lawyer does not have any decision-making ability. That lawyer is not the person who's going to be able to go up to the head of HBO and say, you guys should make this show. is there any legal doc to sign when we present an idea? Does the company present to the artist? Okay, so this is a great example of two different answers. I'm going to give the non-legal answer, and then Sean can give the legal answer. Or Sean, you can do the legal answer first.
Sure. I would say generally when you're pitching to, like, let's say a production company, one, you might try and present them with like an NDA or some other type of paperwork, but just kind of like, you need to understand, like, you don't have that much leverage. And a lot of these companies are going to say, like, we don't agree to sign any type of paperwork before you present us with materials, just in terms of like them reviewing the materials. Now, once we get into, like, let's say Monkey Bun, I'm just using them because it came up in Stu's conversation. They're interested in your concept now, and they want to further develop it with you. Then yes, they're going to generate, whether that's a collaboration deal or a shopping agreement or some other type of agreement between you and them, for them to further develop the concept. And that's where you're going to spell out exactly what your rights are during the term, what they're going to be doing, who has business and creative controls. If a third party, like a buyer, like a Netflix, is interested, who's going to be negotiating? Are you as the concept owner going to get to negotiate directly with Netflix, and Monkey Paw is going to separately negotiate, or is Monkey Paw negotiating on both of your behalves? In which case, you want to spell out exactly what you're looking for in a deal with a network, right? Like in that shopping deal with, let's say, Monkey Paw, if they insist on negotiating everyone's deals that's attached, you're going to want to spell out, like, I need an EP credit, EP fees. I want to be attached as writer, locked for the first, for the entire life of the series, and then attached to all subsequent productions. Like, you're going to want to spell out all of those things in that, let's say, preliminary shopping agreement. And that's where we kind of see missteps occasionally when people come to us way after the fact, and not realizing that there is the possibility that that shop agreement is one of the last things that you sign in connection with the shop. If that production company is negotiating on your behalf in terms of, with a Netflix, they're making their deal for you with Netflix, and it's going to be part of their deal with Netflix. And you might just be signing a simple piece of paper that has all your credits and fees and entitlements. But you need to be considering those things up front when you're going into a shopping deal with a production company. And that was a brief overview. I'll let Stu give his answer to that question now.
Yeah, the non-legal answer in terms of that, I'll just sort of echo what Sean said, which is that, like, if we're presenting them something of yours to read, and I'm like, trust me, you got to read this guy or this girl or this team, they're great. And they say, okay, cool. And I'm like, oh, but first you need to sign an NDA. In practice, most places are going to say, I don't need to read this. I got 30 other things that I got submitted that I'm going to read that didn't ask me to sign an NDA. Of course, there's things you can do to protect your work. You can copyright it. You can register with the WGA. And if you are genuinely worried about someone stealing your idea, like, okay, just know that if you insist that people sign, they don't need to read your script. They don't need your script. They don't. It's just one less thing on their weekend read. So there's a degree of just like sort of trust that has to go on there, if that makes sense.
What does an executive producer credit entitle you to typically?
Again, depends. Executive producer credits will be negotiated by someone like Sean in terms of what is the financial payout per episode? Does that mean that you are obligated to be on set or in the city where it's being shot every day? What are your bonuses at, like, progress of production or not? Are you sharing executive producer credit with someone else? Are you sharing it are you getting your own credit on the screen versus sharing the credit on the screen? Even down to things like tickets to the premiere or something along those lines. There generally is a limited amount of executive producer credits that a network will want to give out for a show because they'll adhere to some standard payouts. And if there's 10 executive producer credits the creator or showrunner of the show could be the executive producer. The rights holder of the book could be the executive producer. It's a very elastic term. Is there anything you would add in terms of that, Sean?
Yeah, there typically is kind of like a producer pool of, like, let's say, back end points, however that's defined, if it's a traditional kind of studio or network. And, obviously kind of contingent compensation really varies from place to place, from exhibitor to exhibitor. Like what used to be standard on broadcast and cable with a modified adjusted gross receipts percentage is completely different from what you would get from like a Netflix or an Apple or and Amazon if it's even offered at all. But there tends to be what they call like a producer pool of a set amount of fees that get allocated amongst the EPs. So, the more EPs that are on it, the less money that you're going to get as kind of like, let's say, the rights holder. Typically, your production company that you're bringing this to that will kind of help make that foray to a buyer what would be an EP on it. But it's just entirely, it's the way to think about it is it's like the opposite of what an executive producer is in a feature film, right? Like you're much like an EP is closer to a producer on a feature film, where you're much closer to the actual production of the show itself.
If you get to know people in positions of power, would you still recommend to partner with a production company first? I'd say yes, because that person could love you, but that person still has to go to their boss. And if you're a newcomer, it's going to make a huge difference if you're coming in through monkey paw versus if you're just coming in yourself. So yes, I would still say go to a production company first. Is there a basic writer collaboration agreement to sign for writing with a partner, or does that need to be customized to each new project?
Great. So as a writing partner, if you guys are working together, then it's definitely advisable to enter into some type of collaboration deal. If you're both just the writers, laying out what each person's going to be doing and moving forward, how we're going to split the show if we go and pitch it. Are we splitting it 50-50? If I'm working with Stu and we're writing a show together, is he really the one that's writing everything, but I'm coming with the concept and a little bit of seed capital for us to hire like a fancy, visual effects person because it's a sci-fi related show and we want to get some concept drawings. Are we splitting those duties like that? Is one person responsible for one thing, one person responsible for the other? Those would be important things to kind of lay out in what we call like a collaboration agreement, so that we're all clear on what we're doing moving forward. And also we're clear on, in moving forward, how are we making the decision, right? Like maybe we go to several different production companies that are all interested. How are we making that decision if we disagree about which company to go to? What we always try and plan for when we're doing something like this, where people are pairing up or we're teaming up to work on a concept at its origination, is worst case scenario, you guys love each other right now. I know you can't ever think about not disagreeing about one single issue on this TV show, but 2 years from now, you seriously disagree about the path of the show. How do we break that in a tie-breaking situation? Do we come to a third party like a Stu and say like, hey, Stu, like me and Chad are disagreeing about this. What is your recommendation? Do maybe I hold the business creative approval and the business approval, and you hold the creative approval? So we split kind of our tie-breaking duties that way. But those are kind of things to consider of, in moving forward, how is this relationship going to work?
Do you recommend to include comps in your pitch document? I do, generally. I think comps help. I don't think you want to overwhelm it. And think about it, there's two ways to do comps. You can have like a page with like 3 or 4 posters of similar shows. But you can also, if you're building like a visual pitch deck, if you're looking for like incorporate some imagery, if you can, from your comps into your pitch deck, so people get the sense of like, oh, it's like a Black Mirror meets Stranger Things type of thing. If you have your script and pitch back ready and are ready to reach out to production companies, when should you consult an entertainment lawyer? I mean, theoretically, you can right now. Part of what Ramo Law does, not to turn this into a commercial, is the firm has so many different teams that do basically any type of entertainment law under the sun. And then in addition, we have this packaging and sales side. So a lot of law firms out there are only going to be doing your legal work, which is great. But where Tiffany Boyle, who runs the department, and I can come in is like, maybe it's like, okay, your lawyers are ready to negotiate any shopping agreement for you. Your lawyers are ready, should a production company be interested, to then negotiate what that looks like. But the lawyer is not necessarily going to be reaching the production company on your behalf in a non-legal capacity. So theoretically, you could be engaging us now. How can writers position themselves as the best person to stay involved with the project instead of the production company buyer wanting to work with another writer for the project moving forward? One, if you write a great script and you are agreeable and you are a team player, they're going to want to keep you involved. They just generally are. Now, if you are a brand new writer to the scene, they might want to try to pair you with an upper level showrunner. And part of that is about making it a better sale to the buyer, because the buyer is going to want to move on a project that has like basically the insurance clause of like, okay, this person's a brand new writer, but they've got someone with experience that's overseeing at the helm. So we get like the best of both worlds there. So in that case, you're not getting pushed out, you're just getting encouraged. And I would agree with the strategy to pair you with someone who's like more the name. When I was at a production company, we would often be working on projects that were from a newer writer, but then pair them with an upper level showrunner who would like do maybe 10% of the work, but it would be a key 10% helping them get that pitch to the point where it was going to really sing for a network. And then if the network moved forward, great, both of them move forward together. If you're on the rise, you need points on the board. And get points on the board, get that first or second thing made where you might not have all the credit or you might be at a diminished position, but now for that third or fourth thing later down the road, you have something to build on. So that's how I would answer that question.
Thanks everybody for coming tonight. And thank you so much, Sean and Stu, for giving us your time tonight. This was such a great and informative workshop.